Hi everyone, today we're going to take a look at the Godox iT20 mini flash, and I think this might be the smallest flash Godox makes, particularly one that's TTL compatible. So it's going to come in many variations, like for Canon, Sony, Nikon, Olympus, OM Systems, Fujifilm. Godox was kind enough to send me this one here for the OM Systems camera in silver, and then I also have one here for Canon in black. And both, I think they're good looking flashes, very compact and easy to carry. It's almost like a pair of dice, right? Anyhow, we're going to dive into some of the specifications and see how this flash performs. All right, let's start out with a quick comparison in size against some other flashes I've reviewed in the past. This is the Godox IM30. This is the Godox iT30 Pro. And this is the Olympus FLM3. All right, so looking at the IM30, you can see that the iT20 is significantly smaller in every direction here, both in terms of height and width and overall weight. And against the iT30 Pro, kind of a similar profile here. The iT30 Pro is, again, much bigger in every direction. And then against the FLM3, it's roughly about the same size, given that the IT or the FLM3 has a articulating head on it. But for all intents and purposes, these are about the same size. Now, the first thought that comes to mind is, what is light output like between these different flashes? Well, the IM30 and the iT30 are roughly about 2 stops brighter than the iT20. I mean, if you just look at the flash heads here, you can see it's roughly 4 times the size as the iT20. So, of course, we're going to get about 2 stops more light output from these two flashes. Against the FLM3, it's roughly about the same. Believe it or not, the FLM3 is actually still about 1/3 of a stop brighter, but for all intents and purposes, these produce about the same light output. All right, now let's consider some of the feature differences. The iT20, the iT30, and the FLM3 are fully TTL compatible, so you put them on the camera and they're pretty much fully automatic in terms of exposure. You don't have to think about anything. The IM30, however, is a full manual flash, single pin here, so you have to actually dial in the power output that you want, so it may be a little bit more challenging for beginners. Okay, another difference is the iT20s and the iT30 have their own built-in lithium-ion batteries, so they last a long time. They're easy to recharge via the USB-C ports. The IM30, however, uses 2 AAA batteries, so you just have to remember to bring spares, and they don't last as long. And the flash does slow down significantly as the batteries drain, so the recycle times slow down quite a bit. Whereas the lithium-ion batteries, the recycle times seem to stay pretty steady almost all the way up until the batteries are completely drained. Now the iT20 is rated for 700 plus full power shots on a single charge, and I did put that to the test, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And the FLM3 actually draws its power from the camera, so it doesn't have an internal battery, and you don't have to worry about charging it. You just have to remember to bring maybe some spares for your camera if you're going to be using the flash a lot. Now, something that the IM30 and the iT30 have that is lacking actually on all 3 of these is you can use these off camera pretty easily. This one here, the IM30 has a optical trigger here for S1 and S2 modes. We also have a PC sync port here, so we can plug it into the camera's PC sync port if it's available. Same goes for the iT30. We have the optical trigger and PC sync port. The iT30 is also X-Trigger compatible, so you can control other flashes with this off camera, and this can also be controlled off camera via other X-compatible triggers and flashes. All right, now in terms of handling and controls, I mean, if I had my eyes closed, I wouldn't know the flash was even on the camera. It's just so small and lightweight. And the controls are pretty straightforward. We have a simple on-off button here to push the hold to turn on and off. We have a toggle here between manual and TTL modes. And then we have buttons here to adjust flash exposure compensation in TTL mode, or to adjust the power in manual mode between full power 1/1 down to 1/32. So you have 6 levels in thirds of a stop. And then looking at it here on my Canon R8, as you can see, if I wasn't looking at the camera, I wouldn't even know it was on here. And of course, the controls and buttons and everything will be identical. Now, when it comes to the performance of these flashes, I did notice some subtle differences. Now, in TTL mode, for example, I got perfect exposures on both. However, I did see that the Canon did tend to favor a little bit more of a blend between the ambient light and the flash, versus the OM System Olympus camera tended to favor more flash than it did the ambient light. So what that means in practice is that if you're taking a picture of a subject, the background may be a little bit darker than the foreground, versus on the Canon, it's going to try and blend that a little bit more. Now, either way, you can adjust both of these to do what you want it to. If you wanted a little bit more blend of ambient light with the Olympus camera, you would just raise your ISO or stop your aperture down, and do the opposite on the Canon if you wanted a darker background. All right, now let's look at a few examples here because I want to demonstrate what a dramatic difference even a small flash like the iT20 can make in your photography. So this first shot here is actually with no flash at all. It's just an ambient light shot and the camera exposed as you would expect for the entire scene. We have a very strong light source here, and that's causing all of the shadows and everything here to be a little bit underexposed. Now, of course, I can't expose for myself here properly if I dial in some exposure compensation, but that's going to cause the rest of the scene to be kind of overexposed, and we're going to start clipping highlights, etc., and it's not going to look very good. So by adding flash and turning the flash on, we can fill in those shadows very easily. And again, this is just a straight out of camera TTL shot, face priority, and now we have a nice exposure on my face and then around the scene here. However, we've kind of introduced another problem that's very common with indoor flash photography, and that's this tungsten or orange and yellow lighting that we see now, say compared to the previous image. So if we look at them side by side, you can see that the white balance here, the camera is exposing or creating the white balance based on the lighting. But in this scene here, the camera is adjusting the white balance based on the flash. So it's more obvious when we look at the chair here. It's much cooler, and it's not because I'm sitting there. It's a much cooler temperature than the chair over here and the walls. We have a much more taupe color here versus this is a very yellow-orange color. However, the Godox iT20 includes CTO gels when you buy it. They're just little magnetic filters that you clip onto the front that can kind of mitigate this problem quite a bit. So that's what I did. I added the CTO gel, and I got this image here. And now you can see that the white balance adjusted much more evenly because the light coming out of the flash now is also kind of this yellow color. And then the camera automatically adjusts the white balance, and you can see that it's much more even all the way around. Now we can take this a step further and get almost perfect white balance, because right now the flash is pointing straight forward and not spreading out around the room quite as much. Really, this background area here is still just a little bit warm, right? It's a little bit yellow, which I like. I think it looks good. But if you want a more accurate white balance and a more even spread of light, you can get separately this TR riser. I guess that's what they call it. But basically, it rises the flash up a little higher. Then you can tilt it back as well and point it up to the ceiling. So that's what I did, is I tilted the flash back, pointed it up to the ceiling at an angle, and then also left the CTO gel on the front. And I got this image here. And as you can see, now the light is spread out much more evenly, particularly like you can see on the credenza here and on the speaker. All of the lighting is spread out more, and also the white balance is much more even, right? Now everything is basically the same white balance color. Now, if I wanted to make this image a little bit warmer, I would just do that in post-processing, or I could dial it into the camera. But now I have a much more even white balance, say, compared to the previous one. So here's the previous one. Although it's better, it's not as perfect as this one. Although I think I like this better, right? In all honesty. But I just wanted to show you how much control and how much difference you can make with just little adjustments. All right, just a couple of more quick examples. This is a shot without flash, and as you can see, it still looks a bit underexposed, and again, that's because of sort of a strong backlight over here. And then here I just turn the flash on, and you can see now it nicely filled in the shadows, and we can actually see some nice color in our eyes as well. Did a great job there. And then this is another good example here. As you can see, straight out of camera, no flash, and again, it just slightly underexposed, even though I had face priority on. And that's because the background is very, very bright, relatively speaking. But then just turning the flash on, TTL mode, face priority, we got a really nice exposure on my face. And we also reduced the exposure in the background so that we can actually see more color here. We have these beautiful blues and magentas and oranges back here, It's just such a beautiful sky that morning, and I was able to capture all of that with flash. All right, so the images look pretty good so far, but I wanted to show you these two images here that sort of illustrates the limitations when you're using such a small flash, especially outdoors. This image here looks fine, you know, it's properly exposed, maybe even a little bit overexposed, but you can see in this image here, I'm definitely slightly underexposed by at least a stop. And that's because we've sort of reached the limitation of the light output of this flash. Now in this image here, I'm standing about 10 feet or maybe about 3 meters away from the camera. And in this shot here, I'm standing probably about 7 meters or about 20 feet away from the camera. So if you're going to be shooting subjects that are further away, you're definitely going to have to raise your ISO or open up your aperture to get in more light or more ambient light so that you get a better exposure. But just keep that in mind when you're using smaller flashes like this. Now another challenge you can run into is when you're using physically larger lenses, like in this case I have the 24-105, this is the kit lens like f4 to f7 or something. But especially when the lens hood is on, because the flash sits kind of low on the camera, it can cast a shadow into the frame at the wider angles. So if I'm shooting at the 24mm range with the lens hood on, I can get a pretty substantial shadow into the frame. So let me show you what that looks like. As you can see here, there's a very prominent shadow right here at the base of my foot. Now there is a solution, which I showed you earlier, which is using that riser. So as you can see here, the riser raises the flash up about 3 centimeters so that it's less likely to cause a shadow into the frame. And you can further mitigate those chances by just simply removing the lens hood on the lens. And you almost have no chance of getting a shadow into the frame, even when I zoom out, because when I zoom out, I'm narrowing the field of view. And I found that without the lens hood on, I can really get a shot at 35mm with no shadow, and certainly at 50mm or higher. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about was the battery power and flash stamina. And Godox claims, you know, you can charge this in a little over an hour and that you should be able to get 700 plus full power flashes out of this little thing. So I tested for that. I put the flash in the manual mode at full power, and then I set the intervalometer on my camera to 999 shots, and I just let it run. And I got 776 full power flashes out of this little flash. So that's pretty impressive. Now in terms of stamina, I did start to run into overheating issues after about 43 flashes. So at the 43rd flash, you know, I was getting, you know, the 1.5 second recycle time, which is excellent. But when I got to 43, it was taking anywhere from 2 to 4 seconds to fire the next flash. So again, still a very good performance. I mean, how often are you going to shoot 43 consecutive full power flashes out of something like this? I can't think of any situation you would do that, but you can. And once you get past that, it's anywhere from 2 to 4 seconds per recycle before it would fire again due to the overheating management, I assume. So overall, this is a great little flash, especially on smaller cameras. It's a great match for like my OM system cameras, or maybe you have a Fujifilm X100V or the new XE5. This would be perfect. Maybe the Sony ZV-1, etc. I'll have all my affiliate links down below for all the different variations. And if you're going to be using it with larger lenses and cameras, you may want to consider getting the riser. That did seem to help quite a bit in mitigating the shadows. And also, if you want to do a little bit of bounce flash like I demonstrated, this is a nice little accessory. I didn't find I really needed it for my OM system cameras, but if you do want to have that bounce capability, you will need to get the riser for that as well. But hopefully you enjoyed this review. I'm going to be making separate videos for the Canon and OM system cameras because there are some nuances and differences in how you set these up for different things. So stay tuned for that and subscribe, but that's all I have for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.